Our next speaker is Joachim Stroh, who is co-founder of Hypha DAO, and he will be speaking about Hypha DAO, the third generation of DAOs. Is it correct?
Yes, that's it. That's right.
Okay, we already gave you co-host rights, so you should now be able to share your screen with the presentation. Could we test it?
Yes. Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah. Okay, let's start. Joachim, stage is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ross. And thank you, everyone. Especially thank you, Sean, for your presentation. That was pretty amazing. In fact, what I'm trying to do is now let me build on top of that presentation and tell you a little bit about Hypha. Hypha is a new kind of DAO platform. We're calling it the third generation of DAOs. And I will tell you why we think this is advancing just like the blockchains are advancing. I believe that Hypha and other platforms really in this cooperative space here, right? Working on this together. We're trying to find the solutions that help us solve the wicked problems together. And I'll show you what that looks like from our perspective. So Hypha stands for sort of the mycelium network in the soil, right? We're really there to build the connections, right? To bring the players into these shared ecosystemic spaces, creating thriving ecosystems. And that's really our purpose and why we're building this. So thank you again for the invitation, and let me dive right into this. Sean also mentioned about, DAOs are ideal platforms for sort of creating and solving these wicked problems, right? And wicked problems are climate change. They are, struggle of people. It's land degradation. It's ecosystem collapses. It's a lot of problems we are facing. As Sean, said, we believe, the DAO is an ideal tool. It's decentralized, it's autonomous, and it's a way to create an organization, to create and coordinate things around the planet. That's why the DAO, I think, is the ideal vehicle or vessel really to do that. So let's dive a bit deeper into, the threshold we are facing. Right now, we're in Web 3.0. To me, this is kind of, we came from 1.0, right? 40 years ago, that was Tim Berners-Lee. That was the first, web that enabled us to say, hey, I can build our website. I can do something with it. And it was very decentralized at that time. Along came Web 2.0, right? A much more interactive web, but also a very much more commercialized web, with the big players extracting the data and making a lot of returns for their shareholders, right? But now comes Web 3.0. For me, this is the next shift that is happening. There's like a paradigm shift happening on the internet every 20 years, right? And we're seeing now a new space opening up right in front of our eyes. And for me, this is, much, much bigger than what we've seen before, right? If you thought 2.0 is big, you should see and wait what comes with 3.0. For me, this is also a generational thing, a shift, from different approaches to how do you build these platforms, right? Obviously, we've seen that with programmable currencies, with the cryptocurrencies now in their third generation, right? So they're becoming much more energy efficient, and people are feeling, okay, maybe now it's the time, now we're ready to dive deeper into this space. To me, the DAO is also going through its own iteration. They recognize that, we can serve like an infrastructure layer, right? We can serve large communities, but we can also build on top of that and go more into what an organization looks like, what a business looks like, what you can actually do within a given context of people working and coordinating and solving problems together. So hence the idea of how do you build out that next layer, right? The DAO moment is here. I think we've heard it loud and clear from a lot of groups here, a lot of other presentations. There'll be more, I think, later. But for me, what does it mean, if the DAO moment has arrived, right? For me, this is a shift from the legacy operating system here on the left side, right? Where you see corporations that were built for the industrial age, right? Industrial age is competitive markets, it's linear money, it's legal contracts, it's the lawyers, right? It's hierarchical corporations, right? It's centralized institutions. This is the space that actually got us here, right? I'm not saying, there was a big detour or, we made the wrong turn somewhere. It's where, this whole, industry that was created got us here where we are today, right? It is the legacy operating system. But now through the DAO space, we have an opportunity to rethink that, to say, let's build a new kind of operating system, which I'm calling here the DAO operating system, right? And this is, to me, where I see DAOs are really built for the information age, right? And you can call it anything you like, call it knowledge age, call it network age, call it the ecological age, right? There are many, names for the shift that is currently happening, right? But importantly here, what we're seeing is sort of a movement from these competitive markets towards much more sort of living ecosystems, right? Where you see much more circular value flows, right? Not value flows in and leaves the system, but it's circular. It stays in the system. It comes back. It reaches more people inside communities, inside larger groups of people. You also see the shift from legal contracts towards much more of an on-chain agreement, right? These are people coming together and saying, yes, we're agreeing to that, we're voting on that, right? We use mechanisms like quadratic voting and say, this is it, now we voted, and we can move forward, right? We can take that off the table and get to the next stage. That, to me, is a critical piece of this DAO infrastructure that we're building now. And of course, it's decentralized, right? It's a new kind of organization. And if you see that it's already being recognized by a lot of states around the planet, like here in the US, I'm in New York, and Wyoming, has a DAO LLC. And there are many other states who are considering now different efforts to say, yes, let's make that into, a better way to anchor a DAO into a legal framework. For me, this is an option. This is a way to say, yes, your DAO can do that. If you need to still interface with the legacy OS, of course, if you still need to have lawyers that sign your contracts and you signing it, well, you need lawyers involved, and then you need a way of incorporating. And there are many, many options that are coming up here to help you doing that. But again, the most important point, the last one here, is we are really moving into these cooperative networks, right? Or ecosystems that we're building together, because only in conjunction with other DAOs, with hundreds of other DAOs, coordinating their effort, sharing their value, sharing their knowledge, are we able to move forward and solve these really difficult problems. So that's the DAO moment. That's the big picture that I want to expand a little bit more here, where this journey is taking us, right? The beginning of the journey is really an activation of a DAO. We're calling it activation because there are many different elements of a DAO that you need to activate before you get to a stage where, yes, this is working now. Now we know what everyone is doing here, and then we can go and solve the problems. But it doesn't stop here. There's a lot more coming after you have activated your own DAO, right? So you can get into community activation. Where does the community play? Where can they interface? Where can they participate, right? Keep in mind, these are all open spaces, and they're inviting spaces. We're not shutting people off, right? We are inviting them into the space to have some kind of a role, some kind of a way to support a community. Within Hypha, we believe, every successful organization, in terms of more of a company or a goal-oriented group, needs a living and thriving community around that. And I'll show you in a second what that means, how to build that kind of community. But again, it doesn't stop here. It goes into ecosystem activation. Now you have a lot of these DAOs floating around. How do they actually begin to communicate, begin to connect, begin to exchange value? And this is a whole new space that's opening up right in front of our eyes here. The DAO to DAO connectivity space, which takes us, eventually to this much larger thriving network space, right? Where you now have hundreds of these DAOs coming up and wanting to coordinate, wanting to offer their services, sharing their products and being part of something bigger, right? That to me is sort of the beginning of looking at, is it possible to get into civilizational shifts, right? So that's a future pathway, and these are possibilities that are opening right up, right now up, for us to explore and go deeper. So that's the bigger picture. Give you one idea, when you talked about the DAO operating system, how do you actually activate a DAO? What we've been doing is building a DAO as Canvas. So Canvas is a model that says, okay, let's get together and talk about different aspects, of an organization. What do we need to know before we have a fully functional DAO, fully operational DAO in place, right? And you can see there are these sort of elements or squares or boxes, right, that describe each of these elements, right? It begins obviously with the purpose and vision. So why are you here? You know, why do we exist, and why are we coming together? But then quickly goes into, well, governance is an important topic. How do we actually operate? How do we make decisions, right? Are we going to use quadratic voting, or is it any other binary decision method we have in the DAO, right? But it also goes into structural questions, right? So how do we organize in team? Sean has shown you, this picture with, on the left side is the big hierarchy, right? On the right side is this network. And they're really different animals, right? For me, what's also showing up is a way to structure your organization in a holonic way. These are nested structures that are coming up now. They're coming from sociocracy, they're coming from holacracy, to say you can create, an organization that is still flat, but it is still sort of hierarchical in the sense of it's a natural hierarchy built into the system. And these nested circles, nested structures are ideal for that. I think after me, I have a friend of mine talking about Nestor, who actually solved that problem with a beautiful tool that can help you to visualize now these kind of nested structure in the organization. But there's more, right? So after structure, you talk strategy, you can talk about resources. How do you deploy the resources? People who have arrived, funds that are coming into the organization, how do you actually deploy them? And it goes on and on and on, right? There's a whole activation process that we've created to help DAOs actually go through this step by step, right? And this is also an accelerated, way of getting into a DAO, because typically what you do when you create a startup organization, you spend a lot of time, a lot of energy on getting the people together, signing all of these contracts, right? Getting ready to launch your venture, right? I think with a DAO, you have a much better starting point, right? It lowers the entry barriers. You can easily move from a group of people, having an idea, coming together, towards an organized, entity that says, oh, we are almost like a company already. We know where people are. We can compensate the people. We can give them a role inside the organization, and it's almost like a company, right? And we can even incorporate the DAO if we wanted to, right? But it doesn't feel like a company, right? That is the critical piece here. There's a level of trust that's now possible in these DAOs that just wasn't possible before, right? It's the trust that's there because you have this level of transparency, right? You see everything. It's written on the blockchain. Anybody can go read what's going on. And I show you even how you can look into other DAOs by seeing what's going on, and how do they create proposals? How do they vote? And what do they do to move along? So there's an enormous new sort of value creation and knowledge creation, flows that are now being created by all these different players that are out there. So for me, this is a fascinating playground, and we hope to contribute to that in different ways. So let me move on here. Quick things about what Hypha does with what kind of problems we solve with our platform, and then I give you some short demo so you can actually see how that looks like, on the UI side, and then we can get into some questions and answers at the end. So typical, problems that I think all of the DAOs that are created now in this space are facing is, how do you scale this thing, to tens to hundreds of players out there, right? How do you activate all these projects, right, that we're creating in these enormous community spaces, and how do they tie to sort of larger economies, larger ecosystems, and the questions, go on and on and on. What you can do to create that. To me, the DAO, again, is a simple vehicle that we can use to address these kind of problems, right? And it's a new kind of vehicle. It's not the old form, there's my boss telling me what to do. Okay, I have to do X, Y, Z, and then report back to my boss. These vertical lines are starting to blur now and really replaced with much more horizontal and flatter structures that attract people, that retain people also, and that I think bring people into a space of trust, a space of, I like to show up here, and I like to go from sort of the liveliness of the community we had before to actually something that creates a livelihood for me, for my friends, for my colleagues that are now, forming this new venture that we're in together. So I think DAOs are here to build these new spaces that help you to navigate through that. If you look at some of the solutions that are out there in terms of what a DAO is actually doing, we try to sort of name it or call it an organization in a box. So for me, is you get a box, and inside the box are all the components that you need to launch this kind of DAO, right? If you find the right components, well, great. If you have a treasury in here, great. Let's put a treasury in place. Is it about team organization? Well, let's streamline that through the DAO, right? If you want to hire more people and see how can we build roles in the DAO, you can do that with a DAO, right? And it goes on and on. You can, create these agreements and decrease the cost of building all of this, right? But then eventually you come to the point where, okay, we're here, we're a player, we prepared, we activated. What do we do next, right? And this is when you see you're actually part of larger networks, right? Of cooperative networks that are ready to join existing ecosystem, or you can create your new ecosystem, your own ecosystem, and invite new players into these spaces. Let me show you how that looks like for the DAO side. Here's a quick screenshot. That's how the DAO looks like, but I show you the demo, so it's more clear there. But there's a slew of tools that we're all creating now. We're all familiar with new Web3 terminology, with these new tools that give you this sort of digital native organization, right? Like a wallet, like these tokens, like exchanges. And then, of course, all of these different chain approaches where we see, yes, we can build it on EOS, we can build it on Telos, we can also build it on Ethereum, right? Cosmos, Polkadot, Celo. There's so many blockchains out there right now, and they're all wanting to attract sort of, what do we do next, with our blockchain? For me, there's a unifying, component at play here where eventually these chains will start talking to each other, right? So you will see this kind of cross blockchain, compatibility and the interop that we all want to see in that space. But until then, what we're doing here is to say, let's just put an interface on top of that, right? And just say, okay, here is a DAO that really is agnostic to the different kind of chains that are underneath, right? And you can just pick maybe your own chain if you preferred one, but it's not really the critical piece. Critical piece here is to say that, yes, this is about, building the organization, coordinating our efforts, and move forward from there. Hence, for me, an opportunity for many, many players to define their own, interfaces. Hypha has open source tool set, right? So anybody can grab it. And if you want to create something else, based on any of the blockchains, that's great, right? We want to see diversity. We want to see more players in these different spaces. So let me take a little bit deeper dive into the structure of the DAO, right? That we're seeing with Hypha. So what we're doing here is we're building at the core something what we call a core team, right? That to me is sort of the essential, founders coming together, building the first iteration of the DAO and creating structure for the DAO. Structure, again, for me is an important component to say, yes, this is a flat organization, but it has these circles, right? And a circle can be anything, can be a unit, can be a department if you want to go traditional ways, right? But it can be something like a group, like a project, like a topic even, right? So you can make up anything you like to explain what these circles are. But they are structural elements, that's critical. And you build some kind of a structure so you find actually a home for people. Right, so people are joining a DAO. They need to know where they can go. Right, they can join a circle, say in finance, right, or marketing if you want to do a more functional structure of the DAO, and immediately start talking to who's here. Right, what are the people? What are the projects? Feel comfortable and then start this journey, on their own, and then eventually even get a role inside one of these circles. So that's one important component for us, inside the boundary of this core team. There's also something around nested structures that has the meaning of a council, right? So there's an anchor here somewhere. There's a root, of the organization, and at that root you can actually put something like a council. And council, again, can mean many things to different people, right? Could be an elders council, could be wisdom council, could even be, reaching back into, it's a board, it's a board that actually sets the direction of the DAO. You could bring that in there and see what happens if you do something like this. But again, this is a structure that's much more organic, it's evolving over time. And as you invite more people into the DAO, you actually sense into what's needed, that circle needs more resources. Let's provide more financial resources for that circle so they can hire more people into the circle, right? Or other circles are created. So let's propose a new circle for the organization, and anybody in the core team can do that, and then the others can respond to that and say, yes, that's a perfect idea. Let's do that and evolve the organization to the next level, right? So that's the core team. Around that, what we're doing is to say there's something called a community space, or we call it community donut, right? That's where the DAO crosses the line towards a DAC, right? So a decentralized autonomous community. And here's where it gets really interesting to see what kind of interaction are possible if you have a community space interacting with a core team space, right? To me, this opens up a whole new, a way of saying, yes, community is here, and you can decide how much involvement of the community you will allow, for the core team. That can be a full involvement, right? To say the community is driving this entire thing, right? They come up with the proposals, and the DAO, the core team executes on the proposals, right? They're just there to do the things that the community suggests, right? And you can also go the other direction to say, well, the core team is here, but we want to sort of check back with the community, right? And ask them, is that okay to do? Are we on the right track here? Are you comfortable with these ideas that we're coming up with next? Here's our roadmap, right? Here's how our token will evolve over time. Are you okay with that? And you can pull them in, right? So it's a great way to actually, have different ways to interact with the community, because it's really important. The DAO, the core team really is, typically, we set it at maximum 140 people. That's a threshold where you see you're beginning to lose the relationships and the trust in the organization. So as soon as you reach, that kind of threshold, you might want to think to create another DAO, right? Again, it's a very organic process. Suddenly, this DAO can create a new DAO, right? An adjacent DAO that does the same process, creates the core team, has its own community space to attract, other people into this, and it evolves, it grows, right, in a very organic way. That's important for us, limit the size here of the core team, but you can have a large community space. You can have thousands of people sitting there and participating in what we call community proposals, right? And there are many ways to then say what kind of voting mechanism do we actually introduce to this community space, like quadratic voting, right? What we're looking at is conviction voting and fractal democracy. Working with Eden on EOS on new ways of figuring out what's a good way to come to consensus in a community space that can be highly diverse, right? Can have many, many, many voices, but how do you align the community with the core team, right? That's a critical piece for a lot of blockchain communities right now, that have a loud and noisy and demanding community, right? And they want to hear their voice heard, right? And they have projects to realize, right? Yet you have sort of the founders, the core team there that says, "Oh, what do we do with all these voices?" We have to begin to sort of prioritize that a bit more. So we find that alignment between the core team, that built the whole thing, and the community who's supporting the whole thing and wanting to use it in many, many, many ways, right? So for that, I think there are different voting methods, right? And again, as Sean said, binary voting is one of the big things that I think is really important for the core team, because they do need to come to a place where they say yes or no to something, right? Because they want to move on and say, off the table, let's get to the next topic, right? So this binary thing is critical. But to me, this is not as critical for the community space. If you have different voting methods in the community space, that can be much more attractive for all of the members, right? So something like conviction voting says, let's just float the most attractive proposals to the top, right? And let's do that continuously, right? And let's do that in a way that surfaces, over time, okay, these 3, 4, 5 proposals are now the highest ones out of 100 proposals, right? And you can just step in at some point and say, yep, let's take a closer look. Maybe let's execute on these proposals, right? And then you can have the core team to say, makes sense, we get going, and then let's split up the work, right? So the actual work, the doing can then happen through the core team, right? Through the circles, through the people who are inside the core team and working on the solutions. So that's the structure. We also have a whole journey behind that. What we find is there are kind of patterns that are coming out of these journeys. And they're repeating over and over and over again. You know, any DAO that starts out now will ask the question, we're here now, we're in the genesis phase. What do we do next, right? What we're suggesting in this journey here is to say, well, you can just look at the first trusted members that you have, you know, pick 3 people, right? Could be the founders, could be elders, could be experts, could be a random group of people, right? But let's pick them. And they enter the DAO, right? They become the first members of the DAO. That's a way to bootstrap the DAO, and then from there go deeper and deeper and deeper, right? So the first members can say, okay, let's make the first trusted decision, right? They put up a proposal, 3 of them vote on this, and hey, we have now a membership proposal that says, how do we actually board other members, you know, into the, how do we bring other members into the DAO? And then you go on and on. So it's a bootstrapping process, right? That you don't, you know, stop here. That's not the end game, right? It's just a stop in the journey of creating this beautiful, you know, trusted DAO space. And then you get to stages where you create, you know, the circles, you attract people into the circles, you know, that are looking into this thing that you're creating, and create the first trusted projects here. And then eventually you can open up the gates and say, hey, community, come on, join us, right? And suddenly you realize, oh, there's so many token holders out there, you know, that find, you know, that our DAO and the things we're working on are so critical. They want to be closer to us, right? And then that's when you get into other ways of now reaching out to the community, you know, finding delegates like through this new upvote process we're working on, or creating their own proposals, community proposals, as I mentioned, right? Or even then start to split up and say, whoa, we're too big now. This can't be handled by a single DAO anymore. Well, easy, you know, just create another DAO. This whole process of instantiating a DAO, right, becomes easier and easier and easier. And this is also where we're looking at ways to figure out not only patterns, but more tangible templates, right? So you create a new DAO. Why don't you just download some of the templates that others have created, right? Where they feel like, okay, here's our membership policy that worked beautifully for us. You know, here's our governance policy. Here's how that worked for us. Let's just download that into our own DAO, and we have a much better head start, right? We don't have to discuss weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, how do we solve that? We can just look over the shoulder of these other DAOs, bring that knowledge into our DAO, right, and then move on from there. That's the beauty of the DAO, you know, that's how we can bring this rapidly to scale, and still don't get into a really competitive space, right? I mean, this is always the question of, if I open up and say, you know, this is all what we're doing here, won't I, you know, lose any, you know, advantage over others? Well, no, because that's kind of shared knowledge. That kind of knowledge is helpful to anyone, and it raises the boats of everyone when we share that, right? Of course, you have some critical information that you do not want to share, right? There's something that you've been working on for years and years and years, right? A product, you know, a service that you don't want to share, and you can still do that, right? But sort of the periphery, you know, the things that helps us to organize, to coordinate, you know, to operate in these new spaces, that can be openly shared, you know, and that's what's the beauty of the blockchain is, yes, it's out there, it's transparent. You can actually see what people are working on, right? And then share that with many, many others. There's also a next layer coming to that, which is impact measurement. Impact is a critical thing for me in terms of DAOs, you know, do they actually have an impact, right? And impact is a term that's been used a lot recently, you know, to define what's the impact on the environment, you know, what's the impact on people, you know, working in these spaces. How do you begin to measure that? For me, again, the DAO is a great vehicle or vessel to begin to collect these measures, right? Collect these, or agree on the metrics, right? And then begin to collect some of these measures around the DAO, right? And then each DAO could decide, yes, these are important environmental metrics. We could partner with monitoring companies, right, who actually help us to get to the data points, and then attach it to the DAO, right? And as long as you attach it to a single DAO, you can say, okay, that's our standard. This is our sort of ecosystem we're building. You want to join our ecosystem? Here's how we sort of measure our impact. And here's the template for that, right? So download that and measure, things around culture, water, soil as ways to go deeper into there's actually meaningful stuff that's coming out of the DAO, right? This isn't, a fluffy idea that goes nowhere. There's actually concrete, there's people working on the ground, there's projects happening, and the DAO can just enable that. And they can measure that too, in new ways. So that's about impact. Then let me see, 1 or 2 slides, and then can show you a quick demo and then go into Q&A. The idea of the DAO for me is it's about building ecosystems, and it's also providing, pathways for impact investors, people who find these DAOs attractive, but they don't know where to invest. Why would they invest into a thing like this? For me, this is a huge opportunity to say, well, there are all these different kinds of ecosystems out there, socioeconomic, sociopolitical ecosystems that are booting up. On the right side, you see some examples here. And through the deployment of DAOs, specifically on sort of anchor DAOs, root DAOs of an ecosystem, you can say that's exactly where the investor can go to, right? So if there's some activity in Costa Rica Regenerativa, I want to support that. Well, there's a root DAO for that. You can flow your funds into this, and then the root DAO can ensure that they deploy in the best possible way, because they know where the funds are going, they know where the other players are, and they can reach out and build that ecosystem, right? And then you can get the returns in the same way as you see in our old, shareholder environment. Now you have the stakeholders, being part of this new ecosystems, and they can get the same returns, right? The same tokens that can flow back into the people who invest in them are there, right? But they're for a reason, right? And they can see they have an impact, right? So that is the beautiful connection that I think is possible now through DAOs, right? So between, investors allocating staking tokens, right? And then actually seeing where they're staked, right? Having a direct, connection to what is happening there on the ground. So then there are many, many, many ways to actually, go about and go deeper. But yeah, that's, I think, where we all want to be. We want to see these platforms coming out. We don't see us as a competitor against others. There are many, many approaches, and we love to see, best ways moving forward and how we can really tackle these problems, right? And get to these new kinds of vessels that we're creating here to attract more people into this new landscape that's opening up right in front of our eyes. Okay, if it's okay, then I show you a few things here, or we can go into a question and answer session. Ross, if you're there, what do you think? If not, let me just switch my screen here and show you a few things, how that looks like. Here is the explore page of the DAOs that we already created. We're still in alpha mode, so we're moving into beta mode in a month or two. And you can see about, there are about 50 DAOs now that are starting to boot up, are going through this activation process that I just showed you. And they're figuring out their way, right? And they can now look into these other DAOs and say, hey, what is going on here? This is a very interesting DAO, right? That may have something that I can learn from, right? I can go into, like an Earthwise Futures DAO here. Let me see what's going on here. So here's a DAO that is looking at regenerating the planet and opening up new ways of creating, finding tipping points for systems, approaches to this new planetary approach to working together. And you can see they have members, right? And you can see they still haven't done anything on creating active proposals yet, because they're just at the beginning of the journey, right? So that's the beauty of it. Again, looking over the shoulder of others, seeing what's going on and how that all works. Let me take a look here at Hypha. So here's the Hypha DAO. This is, again, the organization we use to build the platform, right? So we've been using the DAO for more than 4 years now to build the DAO, to build the platform, to share it with others, to invite them into this journey that we've been doing, for many, many years. And you can see on the homepage here, we have currently, 33 active assignments, some badges handed out, some proposals being sent to the members, and about 22 members, right? Again, it's a very organic process. We had, 50 members at some point, then 20 members, then 30 members. So it really bumps up and down, and people feel attracted. They join us, they work with us, and they move on, right? Which is okay. And we even encourage people to work in multiple places inside the DAO. And not only that, they can actually work in multiple DAOs if they wanted to, right? There's just one metric that we're using, which is commitment level, right? So how committed do you feel to work inside the DAO? And you feel like 50% committed. Here, let me show you my profile actually here. You can see this is my work in the DAO here, right? So I'm in GTM, sales and operations. And I'm in the DAO business development area, right? So I am 40% committed here, 40% committed there, and I'm also part of a council that we have inside the Hypha DAO. So that gives me 90%. I leave 10% open for other commitments that I might have across other DAOs, right? So I can split this really up and say this is how I provide my services to the DAO, with the help of the others. And you can see we also have a whole compensation and payroll thing built into the DAO. I'm a B7, that's kind of at the strategic end of the payroll. And I'm earning tokens. We have actually 3 different kinds of tokens inside the Hypha DAO, which means I can earn Hypha tokens, right? That's the utility token that represents the value of the thing we're creating. We have cash tokens, that is a liquid kind of tokens, for those people who need to pay the bills, right? And they can convert it into fiat currency. And we have a separate governance token. We call it the voice token that represents the voice you're earning over time inside the DAO. And this is just like what Sean said, there's the one token, one voice space, typically in large communities. That doesn't work for a DAO that is highly coordinated, more goal-oriented. You need to earn the trust. You need to earn these tokens over time. And that's why, many DAOs like ours have a contribution accounting system built right into this. So you can actually earn these tokens by contributing, right? So I'm holding these votes here. And because of that, I can earn these voice tokens, right? So I have more and more voice over time, and which helps me to make, participate in these larger decisions, because there's a trust, established among these other team members that are here, right? Quick look at the voting thing, and then I think we can wrap up here. I think it's until another 10 minutes or so. Here's the proposal section, most important section of every DAO, right? And what we're doing here is looking at a binary voting system, because it's the core team, right, that looks at unity and quorum, right? So what we've set up the DAO is to say we need 80% unity and 20% quorum. Once we've achieved that, proposal passes, right? But there's flexibility, of course, because every DAO will see that differently. They may think, oh, we need consensus. We need everybody on board for these decisions. So we can actually increase the unity and the quorum, go up to 100% unity and maybe 90% quorum, because some people, won't be able to join every decision. But you can do that, right? Go to higher consensus or go to lower consensus and go to, say, majority voting schema that says as long as they have 51%, then we're good to go, past the thresholds, and we can move on. We have this 80-20 here magically, I don't know, for 4 years, that's the magic, it worked. And we've done hundreds of these decisions and paid out many tokens, to support these decisions. So right now you see a couple of proposals in staging here, 2 of them. And then here are 2 proposals. One that I voted on, you see, has my yes vote on a new UX UI web designer that is working for Hypha. And there's another one that I still need to vote on. So the voting process is very simple. I go in here, I open up the details, and there's my big vote now button, right? So I can click on that and then issue my vote. And then through my wallet, we're using the Anchor wallet for that. You just say acknowledge, transaction, and I'm done. And then it registers on the blockchain, and you can move on. So it's a very simple mechanism where I think, in this 3rd generation of DAOs, right, the interface really starts to shift, starts to adopt to, we're ready to go mainstream. We're ready to offer that to more people, and make it accessible to more people, because still we are early stage. It's innovators who are here, early early adopters who want to try out this new technology. But at some point, we need to get ready, right, to offer that kind of platform, that kind of capacity really to much larger audiences. So they can recognize this, they can then transition into these new spaces, right? And enjoy this decentralized work, enjoy ways of connecting with others, changing really the entire way of working today, what it means to work for a big organization with these vertical hierarchical structures into an environment that's much more open, much more friendly, where you can build trust, build relationships, right? And, as a side effect, you actually can start to address these wicked problems, right? So there's a lot of things you can do. One last quick glimpse here. This is the organizational page. This gives you at a glance, a view into how the DAO is doing, right? So in our case, you can see the Hypha tokens issued here, 46 million tokens. HUSD is the liquid currency that we have, 3 million tokens issued over the years. And here's voice tokens, right? So 3 million voice tokens have been issued to the members, because they actively contributed, right? They actively, grabbed one of these role assignments and said, I want to be on the anchor council, right? I want to be a strategic steward of the organization. And then earned the respect, right? Earn these tokens, earn these badges, right? That you can start to use across the organization. So it's a beautiful journey for us. We've learned so much on that journey, and it's not the end. It's continuing. It's ongoing. We recently got a nice grant where we can now build out more features, right, and integrate with other platforms, like with Nesta, right, the next one that I think is coming up, where you can begin to see, they have created beautiful interfaces, new tools of interacting, of working in these spaces. Why don't we hook up, right, and say, let's build something together here and use these tool sets? Because things like project management, you don't want to use a DAO for that. There are many, many other ways of doing that. Things like visualizing holonic structures, there are already tools out there, right? Let's connect with those. So that's the story we're in, and we all find ourselves, and we'll see where that takes us next. I'm excited for this year, and it's going to be, tremendous to see the changes and the movement we're building here together. Thank you so much.